Okay, welcome everybody. Glad to have y'all along. That's John King over there. I'm Peter Christian. Hello. John, you said you had a couple of creepy stories.
Some very creepy stories.
Creepy stories. I like that sound.
Both stories involve Missoula.
Yes, creepy stories. So you're probably wondering how he's doing that. I just put both my hands over the microphone and go, creepy story.
Trust me, Peter doesn't need to do that to be creepy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks
when
a
you
lot.
walk in at 6 a.m. and Peter's in here talking to himself in some weird country voice, talking about belt buckle bands and
how y'all
shooting
doing,
squirrels
everybody?
out of trees.
Glad to have y'all along. I can't wait to get Rob Natelson feller on the phone.
You can just see the teeth falling out of his mouth. He gets so into character.
I just say, hey, Rob, can we talk about guns right now? Because I got this squirrel gun. I can't shoot it worth the darn. Can you help me with that? I'm sure he'll go, yeah, that's great, Peter. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyway, so tell us about this story that you, you literally dug up.
I unzipped this story.
Okay,
actually.
I'm sorry.
So you may not have heard, but there's this really creepy murder down in San Francisco. They found this travel bag full of body parts. And some
parts is parts?
Parts is parts.
Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, I have a clip in the queue. You can kind of get the local coverage. This is when they arrested the guy on Saturday night.
Okay.
They had found a bunch of body parts in a suitcase as well as in a trash can nearby.
Okay, now this is coverage from CNN. Here we go.
Police say they don't know who he is, but homicide investigators are trying to determine if they have the man responsible for the grisly mystery. Body parts found Wednesday afternoon in a suitcase on 11th and Market and more in a nearby trash can. Earlier today, officers released these surveillance photos of the person of interest. They say he could be a homeless man. Restaurant owner Tom Pazika says it appears to be the same man his video camera caught pulling a suitcase Wednesday afternoon 2 blocks away.
And he just stops and looks inside the window.
Tom says police came yesterday to see his video after examining surveillance tape from other businesses. The footage captured by the camera inside the restaurant looking onto Howard Street.
It's pretty creepy. It's really creepy.
Meanwhile, the medical examiner is asking the state DNA lab to help identify the remains, believed to be that of a light-skinned man.
Okay.
Wow.
So he looks like a homeless man, right? That's one of the clues.
Let's talk about the suspect.
The suspect,
All
yeah.
right. Okay.
Anyway, found out a lot more about the suspect. I was reading up on the San Francisco Chronicle. They had an article about him, and they were trying to dig into who this guy was, where he can't come from. And I noticed a little couple of words that were familiar to me.
Oh, no.
The word Missoula.
Oh, John.
Yeah. So anyway.
Oh, man. All right.
Here's what
let's see if any of our listeners might recognize this name.
Okay, so the name of the individual is Mark Jeffrey Andrus.
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 Mark Jeffrey Andrus.
And according to the San Francisco Chronicle, he spent a fair amount of time in Missoula back in the 80s and has a criminal legacy here in Montana. The following is a transcript that I transposed onto our website.
All right.
And you can see, if you go on our Facebook page, you'll see the article I put up yesterday. Anyway, here's a quote. This is from the San Francisco Daily Chronicle's coverage. Quote, online court records show that Andrus had arrests in Missoula, Montana in the 80s and 90s for suspected drug possession, theft, burglary, and bail jumping.
Wow.
He had, and this is the thing that really stuck out to me. So he looks homeless. He has a peace sign tattooed onto his right knee. According to the records, Andrus grew up in Missoula and has spent much of his adult life there.
Wow.
In 88, he and a second inmate at the Missoula County Jail petitioned the Montana Supreme Court, claiming that they were, quote, denied adequate food, shelter, clothing, medical care, exercise, individual security, and a law library.
Interesting.
According to court records, that suit was summarily dismissed. You can't dig into the records for Missoula County Jail inmates just by going online. They only keep like the recent stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So I called around. I called the whoever's in charge, I think Sergeant Kowalski, but I couldn't get a call back in time to actually get a recording to find out more about this guy. But I'm curious if you knew this guy when he was here, Mark Andrus, give us a call. We'd like to know what the locals know about this guy. From what I can tell,
Or if the name even sounds familiar.
Yeah, they have interviewed his flatmates. So he was living in this apartment, but he was just kind of living there. He didn't pay rent. He was like living on someone's floor.
He was like couch surfing.
Right. And
yeah.
But he had neighbors and they knew him. And everyone's like, yeah, he's a nice guy. I mean, who wouldn't trust a homeless-looking guy with a peace tattoo on his knee?
Wow. And from Missoula. I mean, if he's from Missoula, obviously he's good people.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a peace tattoo on their knee right before they're going to go
butcher somebody.
I don't know. Well, of course, there hasn't been a trial. We don't know that he is the actual killer. He's just a suspect at this point.
But the reason of interest.
The reason why they suspect him is because they have video footage of a guy that looks very much like him dragging a suitcase like blocks and blocks away. And they have pictures of him.
Wow.
Fairly high detailed pictures.
So the name is Mark Jeffrey
Andrus.
Mark Jeffrey Andrus, Andrus. If that sparks a memory with anybody in our listening audience, seriously, give us a call and let us know what you know, because this person could be wanted for a brutal, heinous crime in San Francisco, California.
I mean, you might have hung out at the Testy Fest with this guy or gone to the Aberdeen Kegger with this guy. Who knows?
Anyway, so we're going to take a break. 721-1290. Go ahead.
When we get back, I have another scary national story with another Missoulian.
Oh, boy. And this one, I understand, is politically scary. Okay.
Well, yeah.
So we're coming right back. Hey, this is Talkback, and our telephone number is 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. And John was sharing the story that he came up with yesterday about this gentleman that allegedly from Missoula, Mark Andrus, who is a suspect, I should say a person of interest in this brutal slaying where they just chopped up body parts in a suitcase.
Well, I mean, you don't even need to say he's from Missoula. When you have a peace sign on your knee, you're only from Portland or Missoula, right? I mean, got like...
Or San Francisco. I mean, come on.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, another scary story.
All right.
Jim Messina, campaign manager for Barack Obama.
Who, by the way, was the graduation speaker, I think, a couple of years ago.
At the University of Montana.
Right.
Yeah, he's also been running campaigns in England recently.
Really?
And he has started a super PAC to raise money for a candidate, obviously, that he's supporting. I'll go ahead and let you hear who that is in just a second. He was on the... Ronan Farrow Daily is the name of the show.
Okay.
And that's a MSNBC show with Ronan Farrow, surprisingly.
That so many people watch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Massive listenership. Okay. So here we go. This is Jim Messina.
Koch brothers pouring more than $800 million into this election cycle. Yeah. That's a huge game changer.
Look, I think the worst decision of the Supreme Court in our lifetime is Citizens United. Unlimited spending allows one couple of brothers to spend $900 million trying to win races. Turnout is down in politics since Citizens United. People are sick of the divisiveness. They're sick of the ads. And look, I run a super PAC, and I think they should be outlawed tomorrow. But if they're going to have that kind of money, I'm going to push back, and I'm going to fight for the ideals I believe in.
I was going to ask about that. He is part of the problem. Your super PAC, you have it's Priorities USA, of course.
Yep.
You're pouring your money towards Hillary, correct?
Yep. We want Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States.
Wow.
Thank you.
All right, some Hillary fans here.
That's right. It's her turn. I think. I think she would be the right leader for this country moving forward, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure she's the President of the United States.
But before we get to Hillary and the 2016 field on the Democratic side, I want to linger on this topic of PACs a little bit more.
Yep.
I mean, you just expressed what is a common liberal sentiment at this point about Citizens United.
Right.
And yet, you are partaking of the benefits of the super PAC system and this flood of money.
Yeah, and look, I do not believe you can unilaterally disarm. I don't think you can get outspent 10 and 15 to 1 and win an election in this country. You know, people believe the lie if it's not countered. And so we're going to push back on the lie. But I think the system's broken, and I think it should be changed. So let me give you an example. I am doing the Prime Minister race in the United Kingdom right now. By law there, they can spend 29 million pounds on the entire race. They can run 4 television ads. They have a real conversation with voters. It's about issues. They have higher turnout, and I think a better system than our system where we had to raise and spend $1.1 billion to win a presidential campaign.
$1.1 billion.
It was really fun.
There you go. So,
So here we go again.
if a back channel guy like Jim Messina
Right.
is behind the Hillary Clinton campaign, I am now certain that she's running. I
of
was
course she's
hesitant.
running.
I thought it might be possible that she didn't run.
No, she'll
That she was just hedging her bets.
But the forces are arrayed against her because Senator Gowdy, or is it Congressman Gowdy? Anyway.
Trey Gowdy's in the House, I believe.
Trey Gowdy heads up that Benghazi investigative committee. And from what I have read, there are some new, quote, secret tapes that will tie her to some nefarious goings-on in Libya, in the United States, and the relationship between them.
Well, here's the heart of it, and why it will be a problem with liberals that want to vote for Hillary. If the tapes end up being what has been leaked, they are going to show that she went to war in Libya against the recommendation of the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And so basically, if you had any problem with Bush going into war against the recommendations of anybody, then when the department that's designed for war says we don't want to go to war,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is not a good idea. Not at this time.
maybe not. So anyway, but that's just leaked. I don't know if it's true or not. That's just something that was out there floating on the internet.
But I will say, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm thinking, let me just, I found something here that I think would really be interesting.
Is it a Seahawk pooping a football?
No. This is,
They've all been a growing experience. I really feel like I've
this is
grown.
Diana Ross with
If I had to live
Hillary's
my life all over,
new theme
I
song.
wouldn't change a thing. I can't cover up my feelings in the name of love
It's my turn.
or playing safe.
That's the name of the song.
For a while that was easy.
See, I can see Hillary singing this. See?
Really?
And if living for myself,
Can you hear her laughing in the background?
I'm guilty of.
Okay, here we go. Come on.
Go
Come
on
on.
and sentence me.
Okay.
I'll still be free.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Hillary Clinton.
It's my turn to see what I can see.
There you go.
I hope you'll understand.
Yeah.
This time's just for me
Because it's my turn. Okay, so there you go. Just a little fun there with Diana Ross.
I forgot to even get in the queue. I don't know when my card's coming up. When's my number? Oh, by the way, interesting thing happened to me the other day.
Oh, I can't wait. What is it, John?
It was really interesting. First of all, I was dragged, kicking and screaming, by my kids to McDonald's.
Yes.
Because I got off work really late yesterday, and there was no time for a quick dinner, and they have an inside playground, so
Right.
I bit the bullet, and we went to McDonald's. But if you remember during the Super Bowl, there was that commercial, like you could pay with lovin',
Yes.
which is kind of a creepy slogan.
Yes.
Anyway, so we're at McDonald's, and I watched someone pay with lovin'.
Really?
Yeah. They were waiting, in the checkout line. It came their turn, and then I didn't get to see what the conversation was like between because I didn't know what was going on until I saw them tell him that in order to pay for his meal, what he needed to do was go up to some person in a booth. They pointed at the guy and said, "You need to go and wish that person a good evening." And so the guy went over, said, "Hey, good evening," and came back, and they wiped his ticket.
Wow.
I gotta say, except for the phrase "pay with lovin'," which is really creepy.
You could get arrested for that. Right. You know, I mean, come on.
Seriously, guys.
You can get arrested for that.
I know you have a team of smart people on your advertising committee. You could have come up with a better slogan.
How about paying with a compliment? Paying it forward? Something.
Look, Judge, I know you want me to pay to pay this fine, but can I pay with lovin'?
Yeah. Put slap him in irons. Okay.
Anyway.
Yes.
So I was just going to say, I thought it was a really cool idea. I got to commend the McDonald's campaign on that one.
Well, there you go. Maybe people will come in and buy stuff that they don't have to pay for. Anyway, so but they're probably only doing that for people with like less than a $3 order. I mean, you got to like
I saw it. So it comes up randomly. There's actually a whole placard there on the wall. And yesterday there were like 35 people at this McDonald's apparently that got the opportunity. I don't know if you're one of these people and you had to do something. I'm curious to hear what other people experience.
Tell you what, we have Gary who's waiting to visit with us. We're up against a break. We're going to come right back. And if you had to pay with lovin', I'd like to know what kind of lovin' you had to do.
I had to do foot rubs.
We'll be right back. I'm having way too much fun during the breaks. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. And, of course, you can make your comments on our Facebook page. First caller this morning is Gary. Hey, Gary, how you doing?
You're doing great.
What's on your mind, sir?
Well, I knew Mark Andrews.
You did? Okay. No, not Andrews, Andrus. Andrus.
Yes, Andrus.
Okay.
He lived down on Sweeney Creek, I think it is, just out of south of Lolo.
Okay.
And he was a kind of a troubled person and made a lot of trouble.
Okay.
But the police caught him on some, I don't know what kind of a deal it was that he was doing, which didn't... We all kind of thought that knew him, he was in for deep trouble, and the police took off after him and chased him and ran him all over the hillside before they caught him. Then, of course, I haven't heard anything more about him.
Well, obviously he's in San Francisco, or supposedly in the San Francisco area. Do you know if he had a tattoo on his knee of a peace sign?
No, he probably had a peace sign because he was always... kind of dabbling and getting in trouble as far as I was concerned.
Okay.
We had him, he came to our house a couple times, and finally we just said, no way. And trouble invites more trouble.
Yeah, well, Gary, sure appreciate the call. Thank you.
How old was he when you knew him, Gary?
What's that?
How old was he when you knew him?
He was selling insurance.
Selling insurance, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was selling insurance, and that's what I did. And I totally wouldn't even go around him because of the way he treated people.
Interesting.
So that is my thoughts of him, and I knew him pretty well, but it may not be the same Mark Andrews. I don't know if there's two of them, you know.
Mark Jeffrey Andrus was his name.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I don't know if there's another Mark Andrus around Montana.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Well, Gary, thanks so much for the call, sir. We sure appreciate it.
You bet. And you guys keep it going, because we listened to you for about 30-some years now.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay, and
Take care.
I knew John when he was a little kid running in school. Oh, hey, he was a terror.
John King?
Just kidding you.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Gary.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Christy, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fantastic. What's on your mind, dear lady?
Oh, I just wanted to talk about the McDonald's Share Your Lovin' story.
Go for it.
So my mom picked my two little girls up from school yesterday and took them to McDonald's, and when I got there to pick them up, they had this story. They're like, Mom, guess how we paid for our food? And I said, oh, what happened? And they said they got ready to pay for their food, and they said, instead of paying, you guys can do a family group hug if you'd like. So my little girls hugged their grandma, and they got their food for free.
Wow. How about that?
I want to see the awkward moment when someone's like, I'm not hugging her.
No, take my money.
Hug your brother now.
I'm not
doing it.
I'm not doing, take my money and shut up.
He got more money out of the house than I did. Well, thanks for the story. That's great.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Christine. All right, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Shall we just leave the innuendos and just let other people do that?
Well, I got to say, she says it was share, or what was it? Share the lovin'?
Share the lovin'? Okay.
All right. Which is significantly better than pay with lovin'. So maybe I was misinformed.
If maybe somebody that works at McDonald's could call us up and set us straight, because it's a nice campaign. And when the first time I saw it, I thought, what a clever idea.
Okay, but it is called Pay with Lovin'.
Pay with Lovin'
online.
Okay.
So, maybe you can pay with Lovin' online. The internet is kind of a free realm, but in real life, you got to share the love.
Anyway, Rob Natelson is going to be joining us here in a few minutes, and we are going to have a little fun with Rob. Evidently, some nefarious organization is
Nefarious.
Well, the John Birch Society, along with Heather McLaughlin, a former aide to Senator Baucus.
Well, Heather's been on Talkback before. We had her on. She works with the Montana Policy Center, I think.
Right, something like that.
Is the name?
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and Rob Natelson is going to be joining us. And apparently, this group is saying that Rob Natelson is supposed to be in Helena today, and they issued a bunch of talking points about Rob's fictitious appearance. And one particular part of this is very interesting. That it's really rather hilarious because he's not going to be there. Anyway, we'll talk with Rob, and I believe we have another caller that's going to be with us here in just a moment. We'll take a quick break and come right back after this. We're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and every single month we always look forward to getting Rob Natelson on the phone with us. He's with the Independence Institute. He's the constitutional scholar, if you will, the constitutional fellow at the Independence Institute, and renowned author and researcher into the background of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, and I think his work, The Original Constitution, what it originally said and meant, or actually said and meant, is on its third printing now.
Yes, it is.
And welcome to the show, Rob. One of the things I wanted to talk about today is the taxation power. So we're going to kind of try to set this first half hour aside to talk about taxes and the Constitution. So if you have a question along those lines, feel free to give us a call at 721-1290. But I'll just start. If you go in and read what the Constitution says, there's a lot of words that we don't have. Well, I certainly don't encounter on a daily basis, like excise and imposts and all kinds of things. So I was wondering if Rob could maybe kind of dissect that for us and tell us what it all means.
Yeah, it's great to be back, guys. As you know, this is an area I'm working on, and what I do a lot of is go through the Constitution, look at portions that seem interesting, checking to see what the original meaning of those might be and what's been written about them. And very often what I find is, and this is incredible after 200 some odd years, that much of the Constitution has not been really competently and thoroughly explained. It is unbelievable, but it's true. And some of it has, much of it has, but some of them hasn't. Some of it hasn't. So the Constitution, as you point out, uses a number of different words to refer to financial exactions, things that money that people have to pay. And a good example is if you go to Article 1, Section 8, which is the primary list of Congress's powers. It starts off by saying Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, and then goes on and says duties and imposts and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Well, what's a duty? What's an excise? What's an impost? What really is a tax, and how does that differ from, let's say, a fine or maybe an exaction imposed for a different reason?
Rob, if only there was someone who was willing to go back and research that.
If you go through the rest of the Constitution, you'll find a similar usage, like a tonnage, for example. None of these are explained in the document.
That's a measurement of a John, 1 tonnage.
As I was saying euphemistically, I said, if only there was someone, Rob, who was willing to go back perhaps all the way to England and research what these things actually meant. Wouldn't it be nice if that happened?
Well, one of the things I did wonder about, all these words, I mean, these are pretty specific terminologies to separate them into the 4 different categories that they have there. Did people just not go deep into the history on what these words actually meant because of just kind of a folk wisdom of what they meant? That maybe we're just messing up now and they weren't in the past? Or is this something we've had a problem with in the U.S. for a long time?
We've had a problem with it for some time. What I found is there had not been a lot of writing on most of this. There's been some writing on what a tax is or what a direct tax is, but virtually none on some of the other issues. And this stuff is important. For example, in 1937, the Social Security tax on employers was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court on the grounds that it was an excise. Well, was it really? And much more recently, in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the penalty for not buying conforming health insurance on the grounds that the penalty was a tax and was a direct tax, so it didn't have to be divided up among the states the way the Constitution requires for direct taxes. So these issues are very current, and they affect Congress's power. And if the court doesn't have good guidance on what these terms mean or doesn't mean or don't mean, or for that matter, if policymakers and citizens don't have good guidance, that they don't know what direction to take on these.
So you said Social Security was ruled as an excise tax?
Yeah, right.
So let's use that because we have the example there of a Supreme Court decision. If someone were to ask you, Rob, whether or not Social Security is an excise tax, what would you say?
It's not. It's not, and that's where I started getting into that to find out what an excise was. In both England and America, they were pretty unanimous as to what an excise was. An excise is a tax imposed on the consumption of manufactured goods on commodities. So, for example, if you have to pay a sales tax, of course, in Montana we don't have a general sales tax, but if you pay a sales tax on the purchase of, let's say, a coat, that's an excise. Similarly, if you are required to pay a use tax on the car that you are using, that's also an excise. Excises usually are hit at the time of sale, but not always. I mean, if you pay an annual use tax for your car, or at the time of the founding it was a coach, that's an excise.
Okay.
And so a tax assessed on employers based on how many employees they have is not an excise. It's a direct tax and should have been divided up by population among the states.
So when they talk about Social Security, if it's not an excise, it's got would it be a direct tax then, as you just had said?
Okay, there are two portions here of Social Security.
Okay.
There's the portion that is imposed upon your wages,
right?
Okay, your income. That is a direct tax, but I don't think the federal government has to divide it up among the states anymore because of the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment said that if Congress imposes an income tax, they don't have to divide it up among the states by population.
Okay.
So I think that's okay constitutionally. On the other hand, a tax imposed on employers based on the number of employees they have, that's a classic direct tax, and it's not covered by the 16th Amendment. So Congress should be required to divide it up among the states the way Congress divided up a number of other direct taxes in the 19th century.
All right. So if you could walk into the Senate or Congress and say, okay, I have a definition of terms here, and looking at the various ways that we have been taxed over the years, and people would actually listen and actually take your advice. You're right, Rob, we need to make some changes here. What would be the biggest change we would see? I mean, if they were able to actually wave a magic wand and make it happen.
What the founders really wanted here is they wanted to make direct taxes difficult because direct taxes are subject to abuse. And we haven't really gotten into the definition of a direct tax, but that's another thing that hasn't been well treated by most prior writers. A direct tax includes taxes on businesses, tax on your profession, property taxes, income taxes, taxes on labor. Those are taxes on interest.
So would it be taxes on a person and his property?
It's basically taxes on living and earning a living, taxes on production.
Okay.
And so they wanted to make that kind of difficult. So Congress could resort to it in time of national emergency, but for day-to-day matters, they wanted Congress to be funded on tariffs, on trade, and also on consumption taxes.
Which would also force the federal government to live within its means, right?
Well, right. I mean, you know that for most or much of the 19th century, the only federal tax we had was on a tariff. That was it. And that's a classic indirect tax. what the Constitution calls an impost. But the 16th Amendment opened the door for Congress to pass income taxes without having to apportion them among the states. Given the existence of the 16th Amendment, it's legitimate for Congress to impose income taxes as well. But other direct taxes, such as the tax on employers for Social Security, really are not appropriate for Congress unless Congress apportions them among the states.
Okay,
and then again, that's deliberate. There is a fiscal and a moral and a political decision behind the Constitution, behind the Constitution's language. They wanted to see consumption taxed more than production, basically.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Eric is waiting to visit with you, as is Bud, and we'll take a quick break. On the phone with us, Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute, and we'll be right back. Hey, this is Talk Back. It's Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, which means we are privileged to have Rob Natelson joining us from the Independence Institute. So, yeah, folks. Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, real quick before we move on. I'm just curious. So, Rob, you said that the Social Security was not an excise tax. Is it a tax under the definitions in the Constitution, or is it something else?
That's a good question. Yes, it is a tax. The founders took the field of impositions for revenue, in other words, requirements that people pay revenue, and then divided it into two categories. If the revenue was if people were being forced to pay in order to fund the functions of government, that's a tax. So, for example, if a tariff was imposed, a tariff of $1 is imposed on every imported dress from France, and that raises money, that's a tax. But they also recognized that you could impose exactions which were not for revenue but to regulate commerce. So, for example, if Congress passes a tariff which says for every French dress imported you have to pay $1 million.
Wow.
That's a prohibitive tariff. That they don't really expect to raise any money through that. What they expect to do is to get you not to buy stuff from Paris. That's a regulation of commerce, and that's authorized under the Commerce Clause. The big problem in the Obamacare case was that they had imposed this penalty on people, not called it a tax. The purpose of the penalty was to influence behavior, but the behavior that they were regulating was not commerce. So they were trying to do something that was outside the Constitution that wasn't really a tax. The Supreme Court saved the penalty by calling it a tax, but I think the Supreme Court was rather clearly wrong on that.
So sorry, real quick, because I didn't understand. What is the Social Security tax? You said it was a tax. Is it? It's not an impost. It's not an excise.
There are two Social Security taxes. There's a tax on the wages, right?
Okay.
Tax on the wages you earn. That's an income tax, really. That's a direct tax, and I think that's authorized under the 16th Amendment. The other one is a tax on employers, according to how many employees they have, and that's calculated to a certain extent based on income. That's also a direct tax, but it's not based on the income of the employer, and so it's not saved by the 16th Amendment. That means that tax on employers should have been apportioned among the states by population. It was clearly not an excise as the Supreme Court claimed it was.
Oh, wow. So that would radically change our Social Security system.
No, not necessarily. They could do one of two things. They could either apportion the tax among states, okay, or they could impose an excise of some kind and divert that to funding the Social Security system.
It would require.
So it doesn't necessarily change how it works for recipients. It's just going to change how the funding stream works.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay, let's get to the phone and say good morning to Eric. You're on with Rob Natelson. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. In
Hi,
my
Eric.
comment, I'm
Eric,
just going
could you speak up? You're kind
Good morning.
of soft.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me turn that up. So go ahead.
Good morning. I'm going to assume in my statements that the Constitution was erected for noble purposes, but I fear it's not. I fear that the anti-federalists were right. We may not know what all these words mean, duty, impost, and excise, or we may not know what they mean but we can tell that how they shouldn't be interpreted. They don't mean that Congress can rob me of my life, liberty, and property. That's what they don't mean.
Would you assume every tax was robbing you?
No, I would not.
Okay, so which ones
I would
are?
not. Well, I look at the Social Security and I think it's absurd.
Okay.
It's not. It wasn't really to erect a tax. It was really to track you and to give you an ID number. That's the implications behind the Social Security number.
So you believe that one, the Social Security tax, would be robbing you?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that the way the tax system is set up now is robbing us. If you want to read a good book, a guy who has studied this, was a representative with the Idaho State House. His name is Phil Hart. The book is Constitutional Income. Do you have any? And what these tyrants in Congress assume is that they can rob us and that it's moral.
Okay,
and I'm listening to you, Rob, and there is no way I would have ever voted for you for governor of this state because you will just carry on the tyranny.
Well, what do you want him to do with when you go back to the original sources and they say one thing, what are you supposed to do with that? You're just supposed to pretend like it's not there?
You have a moral obligation to stand against tyranny.
Do you have a moral obligation to say that what is there isn't there? Because that's a lie.
You have a moral obligation to stand against tyranny in all of its forms.
And I have hold on for both of you. I have a moral obligation to take a commercial break. I'm really sorry. I apologize. Eric, thank you for your call. So mundane. So we'll come back and have Rob answer what Eric said. When we come back after this, I apologize. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. I'm Peter Christian. John King's over there, and Rob Natelson joining us. Rob, I humbly apologize for breaking into the conversation there, but you wanted to respond to what Eric said.
Well, I really had some trouble understanding what Eric was saying. First, anybody who knows my career knows I've done more than my share of standing up against tyranny. I mean, I was the one who led the fight against a statewide sales tax in 1993, who led hundreds of volunteers when we suspended an income tax increase and sent it to the referendum so that people could vote it down. I crusaded against the livestock tax. I crusaded against the system we used to have where you could keep voting on mill levies for schools again and again and again until the voters voted what the school board considered the right way. I helped draft and led the fight for comprehensive tax limitation in Montana through CI 75. Now, if what Eric is saying is that I should let my personal preferences get in the way of explaining what the Constitution actually means, well, I reject that. I'm going to explain what the terms direct tax and tonnage and those other words used in the Constitution mean, whether I like the results or not. The final thing, though, is I subscribe to the view that the tax power is coextensive with Congress's enumerated powers, and that if Congress doesn't have an enumerated power to do something, it doesn't have the power to tax for that purpose. But that's not the issue we're discussing today. We were discussing new research into what these tax terms in the Constitution means. If Eric wants to reject the Constitution based upon that explanation, that's his right. But please don't accuse me of, or frankly anyone else, of cottoning to tyrants.
There you go.
All right, we're almost out of time. But one of the big questions I have after reading your work here, I've read a little bit into it, is it seems to me that this has been a bit of a blind spot. And my question for you is why? Why hasn't it been something that people have dug into? Taxes affect every single United States citizen.
Absolutely.
It seems like it would be one of those issues that would be at the forefront.
I don't have a full answer to that. I don't know, for example, why there hasn't been more writing on the definition of an excise or a duty. The writing on direct taxes mostly tends, and this is typical of legal writing, to try to maximize the power of the federal government by minimizing the scope of the term direct tax. What my article does is point out that the term direct tax in the Constitution is a very broad term, and that means that Congress has power to impose. Many of the taxes it imposes are actually limited by the Constitution.
Okay, and we're just about up against a break, so we have Bud and John both waiting. We're going to ask you guys to hold over through the top of the hour. We apologize for the delay, but we got to do our thing here.
We are opening up the topics as well.
Yes.
You can ask questions about things other than taxes. Our phone lines are full, but you can also post on our Facebook page.
Absolutely. And again, of course, that's Facebook/KGVO. Our telephone numbers, when they are free, which is not right now, we kind of like that, 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. Or again, on our Facebook page, Facebook/KGVO. Our guest, Rob Natelson, the Constitutional Fellow at the Independence Institute in Denver, Colorado. We will be right back after the top of the hour. And it's our once-a-month meeting with Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute in Denver, Colorado. And you have a quick statement here.
That's right. Rob's also the author of the original Constitution, what it actually said and meant, and we're opening up the phone lines and the Facebook page for your questions on what the Constitution actually means. Mitchell says,
yes,
on our Facebook page, following up our last discussion, as someone who has tried or has had to use Social Security disability, I am thankful that this insurance is available. So there you go.
There you go. All right, let's get Bud on the line. Bud, Bud's been waiting a very long time. Bud, first of all, thanks for your patience, sir. You're on with Rob Natelson. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. I'm an admirer of yours. I have several questions. You can take whichever one, if any, makes sense. Why don't we just declare bankruptcy? Because apparently no way are we going to ever control the debt. Or secondly, why don't we pass, how do we get the debt paid off? It's, where in the Constitution does it say that we can have what they say is an $18 trillion, but in actuality with the unfunded liabilities amounts to $100 trillion? And since we can't apparently do any good there, why not just declare bankruptcy? And another question, what is a good author on capitalism, pro-capitalism? Because I've tried Adam Smith and Hayek. I can't comprehend much of either one of them. Try any of those questions.
All right. Thanks, Bud.
Okay. Well, the power of Congress to borrow money comes from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2. Congress will have power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. And there's no limit in the Constitution, no direct limit in the Constitution on that borrowing power. However, remember, according to the original plan, the federal government is limited to certain enumerated powers. So Congress is not limited on the amount of money it can borrow, for example, for national defense. What's happened, though, over the last 70 years or so is that Congress has gotten into all sorts of areas that, according to the framers' Constitution, it's not supposed to be in. And so it has run up these enormous debts. As to how you deal with it, there are a number of proposals out there. There are balanced budget amendment proposals. There are proposals such as the National Debt Relief Amendment, which would require consent of a majority of the state legislatures before Congress could raise the debt limit. There are various proposals to make clearer Congress's limits under the Commerce Power. Those proposals would at least slow down the growth of the debt. As for paying it off, I'm one of those guys who thinks we're in real trouble, and I don't have a ready prescription for you, other than to say that if an amendment is passed and that Congress is forced to balance its budget, hopefully we can grow out of it. But it's going to take some time, and it will also almost certainly take an Article 5 convention, because Congress has proven over the last 40 years that they're not going to restrain themselves, whether Republicans or Democrats are in control.
Yeah, well, it's a slow growth sort of situation, but I mean, if you can start making surpluses each year and putting a little bit down, just like your family finances, hopefully, eventually. And as far as his last question, I would recommend Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt as a pretty good primer on capitalism.
Yeah, I think that is a good one.
All right. How about Milton Friedman?
Milton Friedman's harder to read, frankly. Hazlitt's really easy.
Is he? Okay. Good.
Yeah, Milton Friedman has a book called Capitalism and Freedom. It's mostly famous because it anticipated the school voucher movement, but it goes far, far beyond that. And I think it's a fairly, as they say, accessible read. In other words, it's not too difficult.
Okay, well, let's get Craig on the line. First of all, Craig, thank you for holding. You're on with Rob Natelson. We have one line open, by the way. It's 721-1290. Go ahead, Craig.
Yes, good morning. I do have two questions, and I don't think we all should do that. But my first question, sir, is the coining of money, and I may have asked you this at another date, but how did we get away from coining money that violates Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, gold and silver?
Article 1, Section 10 is a limit on the states. It's not a limit on the federal government. The federal government is given the power to coin money in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. And I happen to, it's another area I investigated because, as you know, there's always been a sharp dispute in this country as to whether whether Congress has the power to authorize non-metallic money, or whether they were limited to metallic coin, or gold and silver and so forth. And somewhat to my surprise, I found out that the term to coin money does include paper. During the founding era, the term to coin money, like, we use the term to coin a phrase, had a broader meaning to fabricate. And money was coined in paper. They talked about coining in paper. Money was coined in leather, for example, and in other media. And so, let me just make one clarification. The founders didn't like paper money, and they hoped that the federal government wouldn't use this power, but they did give the federal government that power, which they thought would only be used in emergencies.
Okay, Craig, what's your second question?
Well, I thought I read at one time that taxes shall be equal throughout the land. And so I was just wondering how they can tax that 1% more than they do us 99, if they even have that percentage right.
So you're complaining about a progressive income tax.
Well, whatever. It just says that taxes should be equal throughout the land, so they shouldn't tax you any more than they do me.
Okay, thanks, Craig.
Okay.
So, Rob, what do you think?
Great question. Gets back to what we were talking about earlier. The Constitution divides taxes into direct taxes and indirect taxes. Indirect taxes include excises, which is usually something like a sales tax, imposts, those are tariffs, and duties, those are exactions that are not direct taxes. Direct taxes are taxes on production, on living, and so forth. Now, the Constitution sets forth two different rules. One rule applies to indirect taxes. Indirect taxes have to be uniform. So you can't impose a tariff of, 5 cents a ton in Charleston and 10 cents a ton in New York. They've got to be uniform everywhere. That's indirect taxes. Direct taxes, and this originally included the income tax, have to be divided up among the states by population. However, as for the income tax, the 16th Amendment was passed in 1913, which says that even though the income tax is a direct tax, it no longer has to be apportioned among the states. So, while other direct taxes, and I would argue that the Obamacare tax is an example of this, that other direct taxes still have to be apportioned among the states, not be uniform, but apportioned. The 16th Amendment tells us the income tax does not have to be apportioned. That can simply be assessed as Congress desires. Okay,
we're up against a break. Rob Natelson joining us from the Independence Institute. Frank, we're going to get you on. We have one line open if you've been trying to get through. At 721-1290, maybe we have some Facebook comments, and we also have a kind of a fun story that Rob turned us on to. Rob, it's amazing that you'd be in Denver because you're supposed to be in Helena today. We'll talk about that when we come back. Talk back, rolling right along. 721-1290 is our number. Rob Natelson joining us on the telephone from the Independence Institute, and we have a Facebook comment.
Claire has a question. It's a quick one. She says, is there any expert regarding the Montana Constitution, which is being ignored and mutilated just like the U.S. Constitution? So, who would you turn to as an expert on the Montana Constitution, Rob?
I would be honest with you and say I don't really know. There was one of my frustrations when I was at University of Montana, that the writing on the Montana Constitution was not as good as it should be. I did publish an article on the subject, on the issue of importation of armed men under the Montana Constitution, And one of the things I did is I developed also a database of documents pertaining to the ratification of the Montana Constitution, and that's still available at the University of Montana Law School Library website. And the reason I did that is because I thought that the ratification documents, which gave a lot of insight into what the Montana Constitution means, were not being accessed. They were kind of being ignored.
I assume a lot of the...
I'm not really comfortable recommending any particular person on the Montana Constitution.
I assume a lot of the authors of the Montana Constitution are still alive?
Some of them are. Some of them are.
Not sure who the framers were.
However, the problem there is that while everybody goes and talks to and a good example is Bob Campbell, who's a friend of mine. He's a great guy, and he lives in Missoula. But I think part of the problem with the interpretation of the Montana Constitution is what went on in the convention wasn't always how it was represented to the public that voted on the Constitution. And for legal purposes, how the Montana Constitution was represented to the public is probably more important than what went on in the convention. And yet almost all the writing just discusses what went on in the convention.
Okay, let's get Frank on the line. He's been holding a long time. Frank, first of all, thanks for your patience. You're on with Rob. Go ahead.
Professor Natelson, do you have an opinion as to the accusations being made against Professor Alan Dershowitz of Harvard University?
Which accusations are those, real quick, Frank?
Last week on CNN, they accused him of having sex with teenage prostitutes provided by one of his clients.
I can't state on that. I mean,
thanks, Frank.
I disagree with Alan Dershowitz on most things. I've never seen any evidence that he's dishonorable. He absolutely denies any claims of marital misconduct. In fact, he denies ever being unfaithful to his wife in any way. I believe in a strong presumption of innocence.
Okay. Well, I think it might be a good idea, Rob. You sent us a couple documents from from Heather McLaughlin, former Baucus aide, and
she's the head. I don't know if she's the head, but she certainly works at the Budget and Policy Center here in Montana. We've had her on talk back about a month and a half.
And you want to talk about strange bedfellows, working hand in glove with the John Birch Society, and one would think the two would be, planetary spaces apart. But evidently you're supposed to be in Helena today talking about Representative Monforden or Senator Monforden's House J4 up for hearing today.
Well, why don't you read some of what she says in her email, which she sent this to Democratic members of the House of Representatives in Montana.
Right. Okay, I'll just read this to you. It says, House Judiciary Dems, and I quote, as you know, Representative Monforden's HJ4 is up for a hearing tomorrow. This resolution calls for a federal constitutional convention to pass a balanced budget amendment. Attached, you'll find our one-pager raising concerns about this proposal, and below are some suggested questions you may want to consider. Note, former U of M professor Rob Natelson will be testifying in support. He's considered the, quote, expert on the topic and has been pushing a constitutional convention in states across the country. The resolution itself was drafted by ALEC and other out-of-state conservative organizations. Note, on the other side of this debate is the John Birch Society, a conservative organization with strong opposition to opening up the Constitution. We had hoped the UM law professor, Anthony Johnstone, would be able to come over to oppose, but unfortunately, he has scheduling conflicts. Now, here we go.
Oh, this is where it gets fun.
Read the underlined section.
I am. We strongly urge committee members to avoid talking about a balanced budget amendment, instead focusing on the lack of certainty in calling a convention. We also, and this is where the quotes come in, we also strongly urge that you resist asking Rob Natelson questions and instead direct your questions to the John Birch Society.
I can't imagine higher praise. I mean, what do you want in life other than that? That's when you die, we should put that on your tombstone.
Do not engage Rob Natelson in conversation, whatever you do.
Well, the other thing is that the writer apparently is a former student of mine.
Oh boy!
So she knows she knows that my methods, I guess, well, and I have long had some real questions about where the opposition to a convention of states is really coming from. Almost all the arguments that are raised by groups like the Birch Society and others against the convention actually were first publicized widely by liberal apologists for the federal government in the 1960s and 1970s. If you look at some of they've taken some of those sources out of their literature, but if you look at some of their older literature, almost all the people they quote are liberals. The particular organization that the writer of that email represents is affiliated with an outfit called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington, which is very heavily publicized, according to Internet sources, by George Soros. We know that there are a few progressives who do favor a convention, but we know that for the most part the opposition has come from the left, and they've kind of allowed the Birchers and others to run interference for them. But they very much fear a convention because it's a way in which the people operating through the states can take their government back.
Right.
And so that's what we really see. We see here's a spokesman for this very liberal group telling Democrats in the Montana legislature to work with the John Birch Society to oppose a convention at all costs.
Yes.
This is kind of doesn't prove a close link, but it's kind of another little connection of the dots that you see here.
Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in this case. So we're up against a
well, maybe. I really don't know what's going on because a lot of the opposition from conservative groups is not rational.
Yeah.
I mean, there are sometimes there are concerns that they raise that are legitimate, but some of the stuff like claiming that the convention could change the way in which the Constitution is ratified. This is absolute constitutional and legal nonsense, as almost any lawyer can tell you. And yet they keep raising it again and again and again and again. You have to scratch your head and you say, what really is going on here behind the scenes?
Okay, we're up against a break. Rob, hang on. And Catherine and Alan both want to visit with you. And all of our lines are full, but we'd love to have your comments on our Facebook page. Always a popular program when Rob Natelson is on. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Rob Natelson joining us from the Independence Institute. And folks have been waiting very patiently. Catherine, you are on with Rob. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Rob. Two things, a comment and a question. The comment is that there's another good resource for economic education. It's called the Foundation for Economic Education newsletters.
Yes.
And website.
Very good organization.
And there's also another writer that he may be a bit less understandable, but his name is Edward von Mises, and so anything written by him. My question, since the progressive taxes have basically two purposes, one is to fund government, which of course is constitutional, but the other one, I'm questioning if court cases could be brought against the way the income tax is configured these days. It is used for social engineering, and could that be constitutionally challenged against a progressive tax, or to force the adoption of a flat or fair tax or national consumption tax to replace the progressive tax?
It's a great question. The quick answer is no. During the founding era,
thanks, Catherine.
During the founding era, the general consensus was that while a tax was primarily for the raising of revenue, it was also okay to structure the tax in a way that would influence behavior. So, for example, excises, which were almost always imposed just to raise revenue, were often imposed on things like alcoholic beverages because they wanted to also discourage the drinking of alcoholic beverages. So it is okay for the federal government to impose revenue-raising exactions on behaviors that it doesn't like. Now, there is another issue here, and that is the Equal Protection Clause. People who are discriminated against by the tax code could make the claim that the tax code's classifications are so discriminatory that violates the Equal Protection Clause, or more precisely, the Due Process Clause, which has a similar requirement in it. And but I wouldn't recommend litigation on that ground right now because the law is so stacked against people claiming unfair treatment on economic grounds.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a question from Claire. This is about the Article 5 convention. She says, won't the same people, the Montana state legislators who are ignoring the Montana Constitution, be the delegates to an Article 5 con? Question mark.
Well, let's do this in inverse order. First, Article 5 is not a con, okay? Article 5 is actually an alternative to a constitutional convention. The states could hold a constitutional convention theoretically whenever they wanted to, but it wouldn't be under the Constitution. The Article 5 convention is held under the Constitution, and its only purpose is to propose one or more constitutional amendments. Now, the way our system of government works is we have checks and balances. And this was written into the Constitution as a way for the states to check the federal government. We know that states tend to act differently when they're dealing with federal issues than when they're dealing with state issues. And the federal government tends to act differently depending upon whether its own ox is gored or not. And so what you see is you have these series of checks and balances in the Constitution. The president can check Congress, the Congress can check the president, the Congress can check the courts can check the states, and so on. The idea being that someone kind of outside the normal decision gets to check the self-interest of the decision maker.
Right.
In this instance, the states have strong motivations to check the federal government. The federal government imposes all kinds of horrific mandates on them. The federal government is essentially invading the state jurisdiction, and there is very widespread understanding of this among the states. Now, the convention delegates themselves are selected by the state legislatures. They're not necessarily legislators themselves. It's a process we've done many times in our history through our various conventions of the states, and it doesn't always work perfectly, but it works well enough. And we've never really had any bad results of having a convention of the states, but we've had some really good results.
Okay, let's get Alan on the line. Alan, thanks for holding. You're on with Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Rob.
Hi, Alan.
I've got some procedural questions on this Article 5 convention. Of course, it says, on application of the legislators of two-thirds of the several states shall call a convention for the purpose of amendments. How was this application made? How quick does Congress have to respond to this? Who is going to determine where this convention is going to be? Will the amendments be pre-written, or will they be developed at the convention? And can the convention itself ratify these amendments?
Okay, Alan, stay with me, okay, because I may not remember all of those.
And not only that, but you might have to stay with us because we're up against another break. So that will give Rob a chance to develop all the answers that you need.
Get out your Excel spreadsheet for this one.
Yes, we're going to come right back after this quick timeout. And Mike, you're also waiting. We'll get you on. And if you can't get through right now, all the lines are full. We'll be right back. Back on this Tuesday, February 3rd, first Tuesday of the month, means Rob Natelson is joining us. Now, Mike Alan had a bunch of points there, Rob, so you've had time to put pen to paper. So what do you have for us?
Okay, well, first he wanted to know how a state legislature applies, and how each state legislature applies is up to it, but what generally happens is there's a resolution introduced in either the House or the Senate of the state legislature petitioning Congress to call an Article 5 convention. It's technically called a convention for proposing amendments. Usually these applications specify the topic that they want the convention to address. The resolution is passed, and it's sent to Congress. And the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress has just now set up a procedure for receiving and publicizing these applications. You need 34 states, or two-thirds of the states, to trigger a convention. He also asked who decides where the convention meets, and the answer to that is Congress. Congress is under the obligation to call the convention. Now, the power to call is fairly narrow. It includes the power to specify what topic or topics the applications are provided for, and also where and when the initial meeting of the convention will be. Once the convention assembles, it has the power to go somewhere else, so if it wants to. Traditionally, conventions have that authority.
Has there been a traditional location for the conventions?
No, they've been all over the country. We've had about 34 different conventions of states, and they've been as far west as Santa Fe, New Mexico, and as far east as Boston, Massachusetts. Not all of them have been general conventions. Most of them have been regional conventions, but about 6 have been general conventions where states from all regions can come, and they've been held in places like Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C., but they could be held anywhere. He asked whether an amendment is pre-written. Generally not. The convention, if it decides to propose the amendment, it does the drafting, but the convention usually doesn't work on a blank slate. So, for example, in 1861, there was a convention that was called for Washington, D.C. to draft a constitutional amendment to head off the Civil War. The convention was actually called by Virginia, and it proposed a general approach for the amendment, which the convention more or less adopted. Next question is, once you get the 34 applications, how long does Congress have to respond? Congress is carrying out what's called a ministerial duty, an administrative duty, so they've got to respond reasonably promptly. But I can't give a specific time frame. However, in the past, generally convention calls have occurred within 2 or 3 months or so of the time they've been requested.
Is that something that could be filibustered?
In theory, but remember that because Congress is obligated to call, the courts could intervene and simply issue something called a writ of mandamus requiring the calling, and I don't think Congress is going to want that. One of the things to keep in mind right now is that the Convention of States movement has a window, a political window, which is for them a very good one, because Congress has now controlled both houses by Republicans, and among them there are a lot of people in the Congress who favor a convention. They can't get the 2/3 for any amendment they need, but they can get the majority they need to accede to the state's request for a convention. So as long as Congress stays Republican, I don't see a big holdup or a big problem there. But I would, again, I just don't see that as a major issue. Okay. The more important issue is among those people who claim that Congress can regulate the convention in many ways, but that's simply not true. It's just a non-starter.
All right, let's get Mike on the line. Mike, thanks for holding. Go ahead. You're on with Rob.
How you doing, Rob? Mike Fussell. Hey,
hi, Mike.
Quick comment on that subject while I was sitting here listening. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal by a law professor, I can't remember where he's from, proposing a federalism amendment, and said that, in fact, you'd never get to the 34 states because Congress would never allow a convention to be formed with effectively no agenda. They would, in fact, propose the amendments under question and get it out there. But anyway, what I was saying, the Alan Dershowitz issue, he wrote a long editorial in the Wall Street Journal, and it was less about the accusation but the means and methods by which the accusation was made, in the sense that he had no rights to face his accuser, no rights to talk to the person making the accusation, couldn't do anything in court. In fact, if he did anything, he was subject to severe sanctions or maybe even criminality or something. And I didn't understand the legal basis. That was the thrust of his article. He wanted to kind of dedicate the rest of his life closing that loophole. And I think that was somewhat analogous to the district attorney in Milwaukee going after the conservative independent group supporting Scott Walker for governor, in which they were effectively anesthetized. They were not allowed to respond. They were not they were gagged, had gag orders, so they couldn't say anything about it, and effectively they were anesthetized and were not able to participate in the election. So again, a kind of a stacked one-sided system, and I think those were the issues that Alan Dershowitz, or at least his issue, was what he was complaining about in the editorial.
Okay, thanks for the call. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, well, again, in inverse order, thanks for elucidating the Alan Dershowitz defense there. It is true, from what I understand, that within an academic setting, it's increasingly difficult for people who are accused of harassment to defend themselves in a fair tribunal. That has to do with the pervasive political correctness attitudes that exist at many universities. Then he also raised the point about the law professor who said Congress would never allow it to get to a convention because they would presumably propose an amendment of their own. And by the way, this also ties into a question of Alan's I didn't answer. So let me just address this very quickly. In the early 20th century, the states petitioned for direct election of U.S. senators, and rather than go to a convention, Congress did propose an amendment of its own like that after earlier refusing to do so. My own view is more pessimistic. I don't think that Congress is going to come out with an acceptable proposal. I think they've gotten a lot more arrogant than they were at the beginning of the 20th century, and so I think that they will stonewall, and I think we'll have to have a convention. Alan also asked whether the convention itself could simply approve the amendment, and the answer is no. Check the Constitution. The Constitution calls it a convention for proposing amendments and provides specifically that you need 3/4 of the states to approve any amendment, and the courts have held uniformly over many, many years that everybody proceeding under Article 5, all the legislatures and conventions, they have to honor the rules of Article 5. That is absolutely crystal clear, and anybody who tells you differently doesn't know what he's talking about.
All right, Rob, we're up against a break. Marilyn, if you'll hold, and we have a Facebook comment as well, right? Yeah. Okay, we're going to come right back with more with Rob Natelson, and we'll be right back after this time out. Talk back. It's Tuesday, and that means the first Tuesday of the month. Rob Natelson joining us, and let's get right back to the phone and say hello to Marilyn. First of all, thank you for holding, Marilyn. Please go ahead.
No problem. Okay, good morning, everybody. If it had not been for the Convention of the States back in the day, would we even have the Bill of Rights?
Could you answer the question once more? Ask the question once more.
If it had not been for the Convention of States back in the day, would we even have the Bill of Rights?
Very possibly not. That's a really interesting point because what happened was many of the states, actually 7 out of the 13 states, so they didn't want the Constitution unless it were amended. And so there was a movement on for a convention of states at that point, and frankly, it would have been a really wild convention because I think New York wanted something like 30 amendments. But Virginia and New York applied for a convention, and they sent their applications into Congress. And one of the arguments that James Madison used to get the Bill of Rights through is that if we in Congress don't propose something, you might very well see the states meeting in convention. So it is possible that we would not have a Bill of Rights if the convention mechanism were not in the Constitution.
Hey, Marilyn, go ahead.
Okay, another question. The Bill of Rights, were those proposed by the Anti-Federalists or the Federalists? I always get those confused.
Well, that's a complicated question, Marilyn. Most of them originated in the state ratifying conventions, and they were the result of deals worked out between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So a good example was the Massachusetts ratifying convention. There was a lot of Anti-Federalist sentiment there, and so the president of the convention, who also happened to be governor, John Hancock, and Sam Adams, a former governor, got together and they negotiated a deal whereby Massachusetts ratified, but also proposed a number of amendments, including what later became the 10th Amendment. And so based upon that deal, they got enough Anti-Federalists to vote for it. Now, when it went to Congress, when the Congress assembled, it was very heavily Federalist. And there were some Federalists, believers in a strong national government, who said, we got the Constitution through, we don't see a need for amendments. And Madison, who was also in favor at that time of a relatively strong federal government, said, well, no, we kind of made a promise to the American people, and if we don't honor this promise, there's going to be, a convention or other unrest. And so the Federalist Congress agreed to adopt the Bill of Rights. By adopt, I mean they proposed it. Obviously, like any constitutional amendments, the states had to approve it.
But it sounds like what you were saying there is that the heart of the Bill of Rights had a little bit of an anti-federalist heart that was adopted by the Federalists that were in power at the time.
Important parts of the Bill of Rights were raised by anti-federalists. For example, freedom of the press and trial by jury. Anti-federalists emphasized again and again there was nothing in the Constitution to protect jury trials in civil cases, and there was nothing in the Constitution to protect freedom of the press or to protect freedom of religion. And so those rights, they were raised by anti-federalists. But there are other parts of the Bill of Rights that that responded to Federalist concerns as well. The Ninth Amendment, for example, made it clear that even though certain rights were listed in the Constitution, that the federal government was still one of limited powers. So that can be viewed as kind of a Federalist amendment. It was very much what we would today call a bipartisan deal.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
I mentioned one other thing very quickly. It was a deal brought together by people in the middle, like Madison. All too often we hear constitutional discussion today where people cite Hamilton and Jefferson, but Hamilton and Jefferson were kind of out on the opposite extremes. It was really guys in the middle like John Dickinson and Edmund Randolph and James Madison who really made it happen.
All right. We've got a post from Claire. She has a disagreement with you about Article 5. She says, Article 5 says nothing about a state convention. Do the states call a convention or do they apply to Congress for one? Then when Congress calls for it, isn't Congress the one that sets the terms, the time, the place, the delegates, and the rules? And once that starts, we're all done.
Well, I think it'd be great for her to check my website at constitution.i2i.org and click on the Article 5 tab, because all of that is dealt with in enormous detail. Essentially, the Constitution, not just Article 5, but the Constitution generally, is written in a fairly economical way because people understood what the rules were. And in the case of Article 5, we have a long history dating back to 1798 and right up to through the 20th century, a long history of court cases saying that Article 5 is interpreted according to historical practice. The U.S. Supreme Court itself has said explicitly that an Article 5 convention is a convention of the states. No ambiguity on that whatsoever. And we know what a convention of the states is because there were many of them held before the founding, and there have been some held after the founding. So the rules are all laid out there. There's a tremendous amount of material that we have to draw on. Congress cannot control the convention because the convention was designed as a way to bypass Congress. And again, there's a huge amount of material out there on that subject, and anybody who claims that Congress can control the convention, again, doesn't know what the heck he's talking about.
All right, one of the things I wanted to bring up, you had written recently about the U.S. House of Representatives. They've been making moves to prepare for an Article 5 convention, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. There are people in the House of Representatives in key positions. They recognize that they can't, many of them want a balanced budget amendment, okay? And by the way, I want to emphasize, I don't endorse particular amendments. That's not my role. But many of these people want a balanced budget amendment. They recognize they're never going to get two-thirds in both houses to propose a balanced budget amendment. It's going to have to come out of a convention. And so they are actually encouraging the states to exercise their constitutional prerogative and bring about a convention that will propose an amendment that would be blocked in Congress by big spenders.
And so what are they doing as far as preparing the way for that?
Well, the most recent example was the adoption of a rule change in the House of Representatives that provides for ways in which applications from the states for a convention will be cataloged and publicized. Previous to this time, there was no organized way in which these applications could be gathered, and many of these applications were passed in the 19th century or early 20th century, and they were buried for decades. And many of them were not dug out again until the 1950s or so. So basically the House of Representatives of the U.S. government has decided that's not going to happen again. We're going to ensure that there's going to be a transparent method so people can see what applications are out there, what states have applied, and what subjects they've applied on, and when they've applied.
No. Here's one of the things that because the time and the date and all this is in confusion, and you have to have a certain number of states that do it independently. I mean, can you go retroactively and look to see if someone had applied for a convention of the states in the past, like in the 60s or the 40s or before, and chalk that into the count?
Yeah, they have to be matched according to subject matter, okay? There are a lot of old applications out there that are still effective for an anti-polygamy amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That is an interesting history we can talk about sometime. But the anti-polygamy, that can't be counted with balanced budget amendment, for example. How do we know that? Again, we have, 300 years of convention practice. Convention practice goes back even before the Constitution was adopted. And so we know that the subject matter generally has to match. As to how long the applications last, there's been some discussion of this, but the better view right now is that they last until they're repealed, and that is supported by the history of the 27th Amendment. Remember, the 27th Amendment was the ratifications literally lasted for 200 years before the amendment was finally approved in 1992. So if a state like Colorado was a good example. Back in 1978, Colorado applied for a balanced budget amendment. That's still effective unless the Colorado legislature decides to repeal it. And there are folks out there who argue that the legislature could never repeal an application. I think that's wrong.
We have less than a minute. We'd like to give you an opportunity to sign off and tell people where to find more about your work.
Sure. Try my website, constitution.i2i.org, constitution.2.org. Lots of information on almost every conceivable topic, including but not limited to Article 5.
All right. Rob, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful time debating the John Birch Society in Helena today.
I don't think I would be in Helena.
Thanks so much, Rob. All our best to your family.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Now, tomorrow it's Walt Kiro. It's tax day, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any you're right in the middle of preparing your taxes, we have a guy in the studio that can help you. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early at 6 for Montana Morning.